Jake Carter had almost forgotten what peace felt like. No HOA officers measuring his lawn, no ridiculous fines, no clipboard-wielding tyrants lurking around corners. For the first time since moving in, the neighborhood actually felt like home. The new HOA board was reasonable. The insane rules were gone. And best of all, Karen Whitmore was history, or so he thought. Jake was kicking back on his porch. Max sprawled lazily at his feet when he spotted the envelope. Plain. No return address. His name scrawled in tight, jagged letters. A bad feeling settled in his gut. Jake tore it open. One sheet of paper. 4 words, typed, "Stay out of HO business." No signature. No explanation. Just a message that reeked of a threat. Max let out a low growl, staring at the letter like it smelled of something rotten. Jake exhaled, slow and measured. Coincidence? Maybe, but his instincts told him otherwise. Someone was watching. And if they thought a little piece of paper would scare him off, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. Jake didn't like loose ends. And this felt like one. The letter hadn't come from nowhere. Someone wanted him rattled. And in his experience, threats were just the opening act. So he did what he did best. He started digging, asked around, checked public records, called in a few favors from some old friends in law enforcement. And that's when he found it. Karen Whitmore never left town. She hadn't vanished. She'd just moved 3 streets over, into a house she didn't own, which meant someone was bankrolling her. Jake drove past the address late that night. Lights off. Engine quiet. He wasn't trespassing, just observing. Inside, through the blinds, he saw her. Karen. Same smug expression, same sharp movements. But she wasn't alone. A man sat across from her. Polished, well-dressed, powerful, even. From a distance, Jake recognized the type. Expensive suit, gold cufflinks. The kind of confidence that came with deep pockets and dirtier hands. Real estate investor. Had to be. Jake leaned forward, watching their interaction. Karen wasn't just sticking around for revenge. She was working with him, and that meant trouble. Jake dug deeper. The man's name was Vincent Holloway. Wealthy, ruthless, known for buying up middle-class neighborhoods and turning them into overpriced, exclusive, gated communities. His strategy? Gain control of the HOA, jack up fees, push people out, and Karen, she was his inside woman. She knew the HOA inside and out, knew how to bend rules and break homeowners. And now, she was helping Holloway gut the entire neighborhood. Jake clenched his jaw. This wasn't just about him anymore. If Holloway won, people would lose their homes. If Karen got her way, she'd be HOA queen again. And if Jake didn't stop them, the entire neighborhood was screwed. Karen had lost the battle, but now, she was back for war. At first, it was little things, annoying but not alarming. A few neighbors got unexpected violation notices, warnings about trash cans, porch, lights, and unauthorized lawn decorations. Weird, but nothing major. Then the fines started rolling in. $150 for non-compliant mailbox color, $200 for improper fence height, $500 for excessive yard clutter, which turned out to be a single garden gnome. The new HOA board swore they hadn't issued them. And yet, they kept coming. Then came the resignations. One by one, board members started stepping down. First, the treasurer quit, citing personal reasons. Then the secretary resigned, muttering something about stress and legal concerns. Finally, the vice president walked away, without a word. Within 2 weeks, half the board was gone, and in their place, new faces. People no one recognized. People who voted in favor of the sudden new fines. People who never argued when homeowners complained. Jake saw the pattern immediately. Someone was flipping the board. This wasn't just random chaos. This was a takeover. Jake did what he always did when something didn't add up. He started asking questions, knocked on doors, checked resignation statements. talked to people off the record, and what he found was worse than he expected. Someone inside the HOA was working for Karen and Holloway. Someone was pushing board members out and sliding in their own people, and whoever they were dangerously close to winning. Jake clenched his jaw. Time was running out. If he didn't figure out who the traitor was, fast, the entire neighborhood would be under Karen's control again. And this time, she wouldn't make the same mistakes. She'd make sure Jake never stood in her way again. Jake had a rule. When things don't make sense, follow the money. So that's exactly what he did. Jake started combing through HOA records, the new fines, the sudden rule changes, the mysterious resignations. And then he found it. A quiet little contract update, tucked between standard policy notes. At first glance, harmless, but then he read the fine print. The HOA board had new emergency authority over property decisions. Homeowners had limited voting rights on major neighborhood changes. And worst of all, the HOA could legally approve property sales on behalf of absentee or unwilling homeowners. Jake's stomach dropped. This wasn't just about reinstating stupid rules. This was a setup. Karen and Holloway weren't just messing with the neighborhood. They were trying to take it, and someone inside the HOA had helped them do it. Jake needed proof. So he did what any good investigator would do. He baited the rat that night. He sent out an anonymous email to the HOA board. Subject: Urgent HOA violation discovery message. I've uncovered evidence of illegal rule changes and potential fraud within the HOA. I'll be sharing everything publicly at the next board meeting. This is your last chance to come clean. A concerned homeowner. Then he waited. The first response came within minutes. The HOA president asked for details. 2 board members swore they knew nothing. But then, a third reply popped up. Short, defensive. These accusations are completely unfounded. You shouldn't be spreading false information. Jake smirked. He had his guy. His name was Richard Mallory, longtime HOA board member. Friendly, helpful, completely unremarkable, which made him the perfect mole. Jake started looking into him. Found emails between Richard and Holloway discussing long-term restructuring. Discovered Richard had pushed for the contract changes months ago. Even saw financial reports showing suspicious bonuses paid to consultants who didn't exist. Jake's blood boiled. This guy wasn't just bending the rules. He was selling out the entire neighborhood. Jake needed more than suspicion. He needed hard evidence. So, he did something risky. He bugged the next HOA meeting, a small voice recorder hidden in his jacket pocket, and sure enough, Richard walked right into the trap. He admitted to rewriting HOA policies. He confirmed Karen was still involved. And then, the final bombshell. He flat out confessed to the deal with Holloway. Once the board is fully under our control, we'll start approving the buyouts. By this time next year, this neighborhood won't even exist in its current form. Jake nearly crushed his coffee cup. They were already moving forward. If he didn't stop them soon, the entire neighborhood would be gone. Jake leaned back, heart pounding. Karen hadn't just come back for revenge. She was trying to finish what she started. And now, it was time to take the fight to her. Jake had everything he needed: a confession, a name, a motive. Now he just needed proof that even Karen couldn't wriggle out of. So he set a trap. Jake knew Karen. She was smart enough to scheme, arrogant enough to gloat, and way too greedy to stay quiet when she thought she was winning. So he made sure she thought she was. Jake sent out an anonymous tip, letting the HOA board know someone was spreading false accusations about the board's financials. He knew exactly what would happen next. Karen and Richard wouldn't be able to resist a private meeting to discuss damage control. And Jake would be there too. The meeting took place in the back room of the HOA clubhouse. Doors locked, voices low. Just Karen, Richard, and 2 other board members Jake hadn't fully figured out yet. What they didn't know. Jake had already planted a small hidden camera inside the room the night before. He just needed Karen to run her mouth, and she did. Oh, did she ever. "These people are idiots," she scoffed, sipping her overpriced bottled water. They're too focused on their little violations to realize what's actually happening. Richard nodded. And you're sure Holloway's timeline is set? Karen smirked. Of course. We get rid of the last few obstacles, finalize the paperwork, and by next quarter, this entire place is ours. Jake's fingers tightened around his phone. He had her caught in 4K, but then Jake barely had time to leave the parking lot before he saw it. A black SUV idling outside his house, and 2 uniformed officers standing at his front door. Jake's gut twisted. He pulled up just in time to hear the words that made his blood boil. Mr. Carter, we have a warrant to search your property. Jake's fists clenched. For what? One of the officers frowned. A member of the HOA board has filed a formal complaint against you for harassment, illegal surveillance, and tampering with HOA records. Jake inhaled sharply. Karen. She knew. Somehow, she knew he was on to her, and before he could expose her, she made her move first. Jake watched as the officer stepped inside, ready to tear apart his home for evidence. His laptop, his files, his hidden camera footage, everything. And just like that, the hunter had become the hunted. Jake had walked into plenty of traps before, but this one? This was expertly laid. By the time the officers finished tearing through his house, they already had exactly what they were looking for. An unregistered HOA document on his desk, one that he'd never seen before. A USB drive labeled HOA fraud, sitting too perfectly on his shelf. And worst of all, printed emails from Jake Carter threatening HOA board members, all planted, all neatly arranged, and all damning as hell. Jake barely had time to process what was happening before one of the officers handed him a formal complaint, filed by Vincent Holloway, accusing Jake of harassment, intimidation, and illegal surveillance, claiming Jake had been spreading false information and tampering with HOA records, stating that Jake had a personal vendetta against Karen Whitmore. Jake almost laughed at the irony. Karen had spent months ruining people's lives with fake violations. And now? She'd given him one of his own. The officers didn't arrest him. But they didn't have to. Instead, they handed him a court order. Effective immediately, Jake Carter was barred from all HOA meetings. He was legally prohibited from interfering with HOA operations. And if he violated that, he'd be facing real criminal charges. Jake clenched his jaw as he scanned the paper. This wasn't just an attack. This was a message. A message from Holloway, from Karen, from everyone who wanted him out of the way. Stay out of this, or we'll bury you. Jake barely made it through his front door before his phone buzzed. A new email from the HOA. Urgent notice. Violation disciplinary action. Jake Carter is suspended from HOA-related matters. All complaints against Karen Whitmore have been dismissed. Further action against the board will result in legal consequences. Jake exhaled slowly. They had flipped the entire script. Karen wasn't just back in the game. She had won, for now. Jake had spent years watching criminals think they'd beaten the system. And every single time, they made one fatal mistake. They got cocky. And when they did, that's when Jake took them down. Jake Carter had lost battles before, but not wars. And this wasn't over. Jake knew one thing for certain. The law couldn't help him. Not yet. Karen and Holloway had stacked the deck against him, rigging the game in their favor. But they made one mistake. They forgot who really had the power. Not the HOA. Not Karen, not even Holloway. The homeowners. So Jake did the only thing he could. He went to them. The backyard was packed. More than 50 people showed up. Neighbors who had been fined. Families who had been bullied. People who had been afraid to fight back. Until now. Jake stood in front of them holding up a tablet. And then he hit play. Karen's voice filled the night air. By next quarter, this entire place is ours. Gasps. Whispers. People looking at each other in shock. Then came Holloway's voice. We get rid of the last few obstacles. Finalize the paperwork. A murmur of realization. People saw it now. Karen wasn't enforcing rules. She was selling them out. Jake, let the recording play. Every smug word, every confession. And by the time it ended, people weren't just angry. They were furious. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Karen sat at the head of the table smirking, acting like she still owned the room. Holloway stood beside her, looking calm, confident. Jake almost felt bad for them, almost, because they had no idea what was coming. Karen cleared her throat. "Let's begin." Jake stood. "No need," he said. "We all know why we're here." Karen scowled. "Oh, and why is that, Mr. Carter?" Jake pulled out his phone and pressed play. Again, Karen's own words echoed through the room. This time, there was no escaping them. The bribes, the fraud, the plan to take over the neighborhood. Every single thing. Exposed. Karen froze. The smug look vanished. And then the yelling started. "You lied to us! You were selling our homes? How much did you make off of us, Karen?" Karen scrambled for control. This is out of context," she stammered. This is all fake." But then Holloway stood up and turned to Karen. "It's over," he said flatly. Karen's eyes widened. She shook her head. No, we're in this together." Holloway didn't even look at her. Instead, he looked at the crowd and threw her under the bus. "I had no idea what she was doing," he said smoothly. "I was misled, just like all of you." Jake smirked. Classic move. Holloway wasn't stupid. Karen was dead weight now, and he was cutting her loose. Karen lost it. "You liar!" she shrieked. "This was your plan. You promised me." But no one was listening anymore. Nancy, the new HOA president, stood. "I motion to remove Karen Whitmore from the HOA," she said. "Effective immediately." "Second!" someone yelled. The vote was unanimous. Karen was done. For good. And the moment security escorted her out, the entire room erupted into applause. Jake sat back in his chair, watching as Karen's empire crumbled around her. She thought she'd won. She thought she was untouchable. But in the end, she was just another con artist who ran out of lies. And Jake Carter, he wasn't just some homeowner. He was the guy who made sure she never pulled this scam again. Karen Whitmore had spent years terrorizing this neighborhood. But that night, she left in handcuffs. The evidence was airtight. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy to manipulate property sales. The moment the sheriff's department got Jake's recording, it was over. Karen screamed about misunderstandings and fake evidence as they dragged her away. No one cared. Vincent Holloway was smart, but not smart enough. His plan depended on Karen keeping control. Now, she was gone. His real estate deal? Dead. His legal contracts? Invalid. His reputation? Ruined. By the next morning, he was pulling out of the neighborhood entirely. A shark without a meal. Jake figured he'd land on his feet. Guys like Holloway always did, but not here. This place, it was off limits. With Karen gone, the HOA board didn't hesitate. All unfair fines, void, fake fees, refunded, Karen's insane rules, erased from history. And the biggest vote of the night? The neighborhood voted to strip the HOA of its power. No more clipboard patrols. No more threatening letters. No more tyrants in power. For the first time in years, people were free. And they celebrated. A guy set up a 10-foot inflatable Santa. In July, someone threw a block party with a bounce house just because they could. And Jake finally got to enjoy his quiet life, or so he thought. A week later, a moving truck pulled up to Karen's old house. Jake leaned against his porch, watching. A tall figure stepped out. Sharp suit, dark sunglasses, a slow, calculating smile. Something about him felt off. Jake's gut told him one thing. This wasn't over. Not yet. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.